Mediocre Disc Golf Podcast, an average podcast for the average disc golfer. As always, I'm Evan Amstutz, joined by the most Daniel of Hessers, Dan Hesser. We're happy you could join us. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing well. In that fun Florida season where it's 40 degrees in the morning and 80 degrees in the afternoon, and my sinuses hate me.
I love that. I love that. It's probably better than 30 consistently and dry as all get out, so your skin just gets,
I don't know what dry weather is. What is that?
Yeah. No, Florida's actually really, really nice this time of year, man.
Yes.
Because it's not too crazy hot. It's not like it's beautiful this time of year. So
High is 82 today, so not
yeah,
terrible.
beautiful.
It will be worse. I was going to say it could be worse, but it will be later on this year.
So ratings update this when this comes out. It was ratings update this month. I think we both went up, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's both of us for the past couple of ratings updates have gone up just a little bit.
Yeah, slow, steady progress. That's all we need, man.
Yeah, I think we're both at the point where even our pop-off rounds aren't going to impact as much because we're slowly pulling all of our ratings up rather than, that one pop-off round being like, I shot a 950 on 830 rated. Kind of hard to shoot over 100 points over what you're rated.
Yeah, 1040 rated.
Yeah,
That's what I would need to shoot. Yeah, so that's cool. And then we got anything coming up as far as way tournaments or anything like that?
I've got a little fundraiser flex start for the Queen Bee Bash coming up in
cool.
Next weekend when
Nice,
this comes
nice.
out. So that'll be fun. It'll be my wife's first rated round, which should be interesting, I think is the proper word for it. She's played a couple of rounds seriously where we don't play wife rules, and she's got to actually follow what she's supposed to do, and it goes pretty well. I think it helps that she's gotten a lot more accurate. We've been focusing on accuracy rather than power,
distance, and everything else. Yeah.
So we'll see, as long as she has fun.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
And raising money for the Queen Bee Bash in April, which is always an awesome event.
Yeah, for sure.
So I saw an interesting video from Dynamic the other day. I think it was Danny, I think is his name, comparing the different molds to the different plastics and like how they all fly together.
Yeah.
Which was very interesting because the difference wasn't as big as it is in like my head, and I have multiple the same mold in my bag that do
different things. Yeah,
at least in my head, pretty different things. I wonder if it's more of, I think this is flippy, so I throw it flat to Anheuser just naturally, and it's not as flippy as I like to think it is.
Yeah. Did you see Trash Panda's last video about how they chose the flight numbers for their putter?
No, it's been in my feed. I've been meaning to watch it.
It's worth a watch. So they take the disc and they send it to, they sent out a survey to everybody who threw it and said, hey, what do you think of the flight numbers, right? And then they sent it to Loft Discs, who do like the Luft discs. And they did like computer analyzed, like this is what it should fly like. And then they melded the two. Spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't seen the video, I'm basically telling you the entire video, but
I'll have to watch it. Thank you.
They melded those two numbers together to come up with their flight numbers.
Awesome.
And I thought that was a very interesting way of doing it, because he talks about how like discs will fly different in different altitudes or different arm speeds, right? So that was a very interesting way of doing it. And when it comes to flight numbers specifically, I know everybody always talks about them and has their own opinions and everything, but until we have like a computerized machine throwing it specific each angle and then like basically a third party doing flight numbers instead of manufacturers doing it, you know what I mean? Until we have that, I really liked this approach of it.
Yeah. So a little insight on how AGL does it is it's anybody can go in. I think it's at the bottom of their website. They have a bunch of forms that you can fill out, a survey that say, hey, this is what I think the flight numbers are. And if it's already established and enough people respond to it saying that it's different, Josh will go and change it, which is really
cool. Yeah.
awesome. But I have found that I need to add or take away some stability from the numbers just for my own arm speed, because I throw a little faster than the average disc golfer. And then so like everything's just a touch flippier for me.
Well, that and where you're at compared to where they're located. Like AGL is what, like very
California.
heavily in the Pacific Northwest area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Northern California, they're all over, like very heavy in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's done at altitude versus where you're at is zero.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So it definitely variables to take into account, but the fact that it's crowdsourced and not just like shout out to Innova. This episode we're gonna rag on them a bit, but where they just kind of say these are the numbers from what I understand, and it can vary wildly between runs and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Trash Panda disc and the flight numbers. I've heard those are really, really good dying discs.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely seen some really cool dies on those.
Yeah, and if any of our listeners want to get an awesome die and they have a Trash Panda disc, they can reach out to Spike Heiser Dies at shdies_DG, and they will be doing our giveaway for this month. This provided by our Tide and True sponsor, the Disc Shop, but Spike Heiser Dies will be dyeing it and we will be giving it away. So based out of Macon, great dies. Give them a look.
Yeah, definitely kind of excited to see what he's gonna do to it. It's always, man, I love dyed discs. So like half my bag is dyed, so I love it. Yeah, well, there is quite a bunch of different things going on in the disc golf world right now with players leaving sponsors and the All-Star event getting ready to kick off. So we've got our next guest lined up who likes to talk on a bunch of different things with disc golf and can't wait to hear what he has to say.
This week's episode is brought to you by the Disc Shop. One of the best days for a disc golfer is New Disc Day. With different runs of discs, the best way to get exactly what you want is by seeing what you're buying. The Disc Shop in Middleburg, Florida has the largest selection in store in Jacksonville. Want the latest from Discmania? The Disc Shop has you covered. Looking for starter kits to introduce your friends? Head on down to the Disc Shop. If you prefer the convenience of online shopping, head over to thediscshop.com for all your disc golf needs. Listeners get 10% off when using the code MDGPOD at checkout online or by mentioning the podcast while in store. Located halfway between Trinity and Ronnie Van Zant, the Disc Shop is the spot. This week, we're excited to welcome back Matt Graham of the Matt Show, Nick and Matt Show. I always want to do the Matt and Nick. I think we talked about this last time, but Nick and Matt Show.
You're cracking me up. People have referred to it that way for a long time, jokingly. Not many mess it up on accident, so I don't know which that was, but it's I talk more than Nick, but if I let Nick get off on a long leash, he'll talk just as much as me, so we're all good.
Nice. Yeah, always love your long form podcast. Always a lot of discussions that come up. You never think like, oh, this big thing happened this week, and you guys talk about everything that I didn't even know was happening.
Well, I'll tell you how that happens, but the long form podcast is an interesting thing. So when we started, we didn't quite know what we were going to do. We're like, let's nail like 45 minutes or an hour, and every show was an hour and a half. Eventually we were just like, let's just roll with it, and then it turned into 2 hours, and it was like, that seems about right. We could go longer, but we're like, we need to be done because we'll just keep going all night. And so we just call it off at 2 hours. But the topics that you're referring to that maybe you wouldn't have thought about, it's literally as simple. And I'm not saying you couldn't think this up yourself, but social media, Twitter, Reddit, all these places, text threads that we have going on with who knows what. Statmando is involved in our group, obviously. Evan, we have group chats going. Intern Ben has been like really interested in disc golf for the past couple of years. He's in deep. I mean, like he's telling us during like the Simon saga of like, where's Simon going? He's like, I've got sources. I'm like, dude, you just got you. How do you get sources? He's like, people are messaging me. And I'm like, okay, all right. So that's because I'm not going to get off track, but the point is I just take a notepad in my iPhone and I just, when I think of anything, I'm scrolling Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and I see something that like, oh, it's interesting. I just write it down throughout the week. And then long story short is you got a whole bunch you can talk about. And the Nick and Matt show, Evan and intern Ben, we could pick anything and just talk about it. So, and then one last thing, long form podcast. When I first started, my wife's like, honey, that is a very long podcast. And she's like, I don't know, like, if people are going to be able to listen to that. And she's going off. And I was like, you got to understand, like, we aren't making this for the guy or the girl who wants to catch up on a 15-minute update on disc golf. Like, it's more the Nick and Matt show. It's like a sports talk show. Like, that's what we're going for. We just put it on in the background, listen to it while you're at work or you're driving down the road. Like, as if you want it, background noise, but it's disc golf. It's disc golf. Every now and then you might catch one nugget where you're like, oh, that's cool. But other than that, yeah, we're just there to entertain at some level.
Yeah, you mentioned intern Ben. I think he's been a great addition to your guys' podcast. He's definitely brought some humor to it. It's always been, but he's definitely brought and added that.
Yes, if you ever get a chance to meet him in person, he's exactly who he is on the show and more. Like, people have coined the term Benergy for him. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Ben, we love you, and he knows it. On the course, if he throws a bad shot or a putt or a good, like, go watch one of our latest, like, we'll film every now and then, like a round, like shot by shot. Just go watch a little bit. That's not manufactured and that's not fabricated. His energy is real. Like, if he throws a shot or Evan throws a bad shot and Ben needed him to throw the bad shot, like, Ben will just scream, like throw his hands down. And he's just like, I mean, it is intense. Called Benergy. That's the name. But besides the Benergy, the way that we got Ben was kind of, it just fell into place the same way we got Evan. And it's like the right time, the right place, me saying yes, Nick saying yes. Intern Ben texted me or messaged me on social media whenever it was, right before he came on. I'm trying to think. It's been well over the year now, maybe a year and a half. And he literally gave me like his pitch, like, hey, if you ever need anybody to like help, I heard on your show, like, you could use some help producing like live, so I'm not looking at the buttons, while I'm trying to switch things. If you ever need anybody, I'm free, won't cost you $1. Just here to help. I have a little bit of experience like with camera work, and I don't know if you ever heard the episode. He actually has a few, maybe 4 or 5 Spotify tracks. If you look up Ben Kenny, and it's like these rap jams, like cool grooves. And I'm like, this guy is unique. And he lives in the same town as me. Like, I knew him from years ago, but like we never hung, we weren't friends. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, and so for him to say that, I'm like, all right, let's give it a go. You're the intern. And the reason I called him the intern right out of the gate was for legit purpose. Like, Ben, I think you knew this, but I wanted it to be a trial base. Like, I didn't want to just bring somebody in as like, okay, you're filling a spot. I wanted it to be, let's see how this works out. And if I call you the intern, when this doesn't work out in 3 months, hey, hope your internship was great, um, but in all seriousness, he's added an element, as you just said in my long-winded answer, he's added an element to the show that I quite frankly think it'd be hard. We'd have to go through a lot of interviews to find anybody even close to that. He does a great job with it. People love him. For the first year, he received only positive comments. Now, YouTube is where a lot of comments come in for our show. Although, interestingly enough, most of our listeners are not on YouTube.
Right.
But all of our comments come in through YouTube. And he's always looking he's like, oh, you don't want to look at the comments today, Matt. And I'm like, bro, I gave up looking at comments 2 years. It's enough. I can't do it. I can't handle it. I mean, Simon Lizotte, even himself, he's like, I don't like looking at the comments. It's horrible. So I stopped looking, but he's like, you don't want to look. And I'm like, thanks. Now you're making me think, what could these comments be? But
now I'm going to look.
Yeah. And then it like ruins my day, unfortunately. And then I'm like, dude, you just got to give up on the comments. They're what they are. But Ben, for the longest time, everyone would be like, we love Ben, kick Matt off the show. And I'm like, what? So anyways, so Ben gets all this love. And one day, like he got like some weird hate comment. And man, that kid, the Benergy, it's so sad. It was like drained from him. It was just drained. And I'm like, bro, that's what it's been like for years. But anyways, that's a whole different conversation. But Ben, excellent contribution to our show. And the majority of it, he's just sitting there pushing buttons for us. But when he does bring something, people love it.
So yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys are college football fans, but Bear on the Saturday morning college football show where he has his bets and every now and then again chimes in with like his takes on things, and it just adds a different perspective every now and again. But it's always fun to cut away to like behind the scenes, just some dude in a chair with all the panel and all that. It's just adds a bit of character.
Absolutely. And sometimes because of his tenure with the sport being fairly small, again, really deep, right now it's really deep, he still brings some funny takes every now and then. We got to roast him a little bit, like, what are you saying? But we love him, absolutely. And for those who listen only, they don't imagine the character that he is. He just got his haircut, but man, that guy was, I mean, tie-dye shirts, kind of baggy sweatpants, long hair, and just like crazy energy. So anyway, crazy cool kid. I'm glad we just gave him a whole segment right now, because I'm going to tell him he was here and he'll love it. Right, Ben? You love it.
So you mentioned that all your comments, or the majority of your comments, come from YouTube, but your listens are elsewhere. Where do you get the majority of your listens?
It's podcast audio platforms,
like Spotify, Apple Music type thing.
Spotify, podcast. What is Apple Podcast? Yeah, Apple Podcast, Google, Amazon, wherever people listen to their podcast. When I say majority, it really depends. Like the Simon interview was majority YouTube. But we did get our record. That was our record show by far. Record both podcast platform and YouTube. So like it really depends on the episode and maybe who you have on. But generally, I would say the average is pretty close. But you know what I value, and I hate to say this for anyone who listens to YouTube, like we value as a subscriber, like hands down, because that's fun for us. That's why we record it live. But when I say value, I'm pretty sure, and analytics show this, that our podcast listeners are listening through a lot longer portion of the show as opposed to someone on YouTube. And I get it. Again, you're playing it in the background as opposed to having a YouTube stream going. And so that's it. But so everyone that gets, we'll call it, downloaded via podcast platform, I'm always like, yes, let's go. So
yeah, I know, like I've tried to catch some of the live ones on YouTube, but it's kind of a challenge, because it's, you kind of have to stop what you're doing and like focus for a couple hours, where like the Spotify version, you can just hit pause or move on,
There are about, on average, there's about 250 to 350 every week who will pause for 2 hours and they will listen to our show.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is incredible. and that's our average. Like when I said Simon's our record show, I think we averaged like 2,500 for about 2 hours, which that was crazy. But the point is, there are some people who are pausing, and I'm always like, kudos to you. I really appreciate the support, because like I've done it. Smashbox has been a thing for a lot longer than us, and I still find myself, because they're central time, and I'm not sure what time zone you are, but it doesn't matter. But they're central time, and for me, it means it's a later night to listen to them, and I'll find myself where I get in bed being like, oh, it says they're live. I'm going to stop in. I'll listen for a little bit and I find it interesting. And I'm like, no, I can't stay up this whole time. So even me, like, I'll catch it the next day at work. I'll play their podcast while I'm working. So it's the same type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
You mentioned that Simon interview. I remember when that came out because I was actually on a disc golf road trip with one of my buddies, and it dropped on Apple Podcasts that day, one of the days, because we got to one of the spots we were staying. We're like, we're going to stay up. We're going to listen to the interview. It's going to be great. And then we passed out at like 8:00 in the evening because we were so tired. But yeah, we were listening to it during one of our rounds. What is it like being so plugged in? And I don't know if you're going to like be saying plugged in and having all these different contract conversations going on. How much do you know? How much are you able to say?
That's a good question. And I don't want to it's the Matt Graham way. I don't want to over talk like about it. So I'm trying to think how to simplify it. The very short version, and I'll let you ask more questions about it. The very short version is that we do typically know pretty confidently what's going to happen with a big announcement. And that's because we are, as you said, plugged in. We're not special. Like, there's very few and far where I've received text messages from some random person who said, here's some new information. That happened once with like, oh, the Pro Tour Finale Championship's not going to be at Hornet's Nest. It's getting moved. And that was like 3 months out. They're like, this is interesting stuff. Nobody's talking about it yet, but we have inside scoop because we're on the ground here. Like, that happens every now and then, but typically it's just through conversations with people that we know in disc golf who are also in the know. And so, like, I'm not fully at liberty to say, but I'll I'll say this: we knew pretty confidently what was going to happen with the Simon interview, and so luckily for us, we were able to negotiate that interview really before it was announced. Now, if you listen to our podcast episodes prior to that, it was, hey, stay tuned, everybody. Once he makes an announcement, you better be sure we're going to try to line up that interview. Like, stay tuned. We're going to try. We're pretty sure we're going to get it, kind of a thing. And we obviously, I say obviously, but we had that lined up. So what is that like? What do we know? Like, we knew that. And so when we talk about things on the show, this was the first year where I wasn't sure if I liked knowing information early. And that might come off as a little bit of a surprise to people who would like to know this information. And I'm not saying that arrogantly. I'm saying, like, if I didn't have a talk show, I absolutely want to know everything early.
Right.
And I would be in the same seat as you. Like, I love that stuff. And I love speculating. But once I know it and it's not a question anymore, how do you fabricate speculation, right? And how do you do it in a way where the people that know are like, bro, you're talking about it and I don't want you to talk about it, right? So it's like, how do we do that? Like, it helps me to know and I'm excited, but I have to be careful about how I talk about it. Like, I listen to some of the Foundation podcasts too. Like, I try to be well-rounded when it makes sense. And I remember Hunter talking about it. He's like, I don't know anything, but all this stuff is making sense to me. X, Y, Z, bah, 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 bah. And I'm like, man, it must be nice to not know anything because you can speculate freely about this stuff and nobody can hold it against you. So long story short is it is unique. This last time, though, I did not fill in half of the Nick and Matt show. They kept asking Please tell me. And you would think I'd be that open, but I had made more or less what you would call a promise not to. And so I had to do everything that I possibly could to say, you guys can speculate in front of me all of you want. I'll even speculate with you, but I'm not going to tell you what's right and wrong. Like, it was tough. So I don't know how that answers your question, but long story short is we do not know everything, but when we do, it's kind of this weird mix. Nick Carl last year or 2 years ago announced live on our show that somebody, Andrew Marweed, was going to DGA before Andrew Marweed did. And we all like got quiet for a second. And Evan goes, wait, did he already announce that? And Nick's face just bright red, just like, what have I done? Like, this is a live show. And the chat's just going, that's why we watch live. And like, but the funny part is Nick goes, he's just trying to backtrack. Oh, actually, no, I don't know. I must have been thinking something else. And he's doing this whole thing like that, but it was too late. So it's a weird mix. I don't know. I don't know if I'd rather not know or know. Next year, we'll just see what happens. Hopefully we won't know anything. We can just speculate all we want.
Yeah, I know Brody said on debate night, other than Discraft, which he kind of doesn't have a choice but to know with some of those, he tries to stay out of it because then it makes it difficult for him as a podcaster who's also on tour to not accidentally say something.
He's in a really unique spot because he's touring and he's talking and he's being, quote, an analyst, and he's popular with, you know, the amount of people that know and follow him and want to give him information. I mean, it is what it is. Leaking, not leaky leakers, talking about leaking things. I mean, that was an interesting conversation too. Touring disc golfers this year who were being very open with what they thought was going to happen, but they didn't even say it in, I think, kind of way. They said it in a, this is what's going to happen. We're putting everything out there for you to know. And that's really interesting too. So that kind of brings us, and I don't know if you're going here, but that kind of brings us to Gannon Buhr's announcement recently. Did that take any of you by surprise?
I figured the guy was gonna get his bag somewhere. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
So when he announced it, you were expecting that?
I wasn't expecting it now, but I'd heard from some of my Prodigy collector friends that he was offloading a ton of stuff. I know that there's that rumor before.
Well, what's interesting, and I'm sure you followed it for quite a while, or him, there were other years where he did that. And I remember whether it was last year or the year before, I was following it. I'm like, the kid is unloading so much Prodigy plastic. Like, it's definitely going to happen. And it never did. So it didn't strike me as weird in that way. Yes, you could speculate on it. In hindsight, when it happens, you can say, look, it's true. And I'm not calling you out to say that's what you're doing, but I think I had a feeling, I don't want to say I have a source, but I had somebody who alluded to me, and I'll just leave it at that, with there's going to be a media announcement coming and there's going to be a player announcement coming. And he goes, I can't tell you anymore. And I'm having dinner with this individual, and I'm like, okay, I can totally respect that, but I am hoping you kind of say something more as the night goes on. And so I didn't really push, but I did say that I got that out of him. I was like, well, what kind of announcements are we talking? And it was a media and a player yet to come. And the media announcement came out, and it was the Jomez is now covering GK Pros out, you know, FPO, MPO, Jomez, and then GK Pro is out, and yada, yada. And I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting. So then I'm thinking, man, still, if that's accurate, there's still a player announcement to come. And so, yes, I felt like in a group chat probably 5 days ago, I was like, so where are we at with Gannon leaving Prodigy? And I'm laughing. Nick responded. He goes, I thought we were joking about that, because we had talked about it like previously. He's like, I thought we were joking about that take. And I was like, I'm starting to get this feeling and the whispers out there that like it's going to happen. So to your point, Dan, yes, like it didn't catch me by surprise, but I'll say this, but I was surprised that it happened. Like when it happened.
Yeah, like I thought it was going to be way earlier. Like the fact that it's this, like what All Stars is next week, right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
no, this weekend.
this weekend.
So yeah,
and by the time people listen to this podcast, it might be happening now.
Yeah. So like it's that struck me as a little, but other than that, I mean, I figured somebody was going to pay the man. You know what I mean? Like somebody was going to.
Well, is somebody paying the man?
I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll find out.
I think it only makes sense that he's going to get paid. Some of just the timing. I think the Foundation boys did some pretty good internet sleuthing yesterday or the day before, where they noticed that the only people that are following him manufacturing wise are Prodigy and Discmania. Discmania just got their payment for Simon. Like it just kind of all lines up to where it'd be shocking if it was someone else. Like that, it'd almost be more shocking than him leaving if it was him to like Discraft or MVP or anything like that.
Yeah, and again, I don't even know if we really talked about this too much on the show, and that's because I wasn't the one who came up with this idea. I'll leave it at that. But somebody had told me, man, I'm pretty sure Gannon is going to be leaving. This was a few months ago. And then hearing things like, well, it's not going to work out, something contract, this, that, or other. And so kind of put that one to bed a little bit, like it's not going to be this year. And then Gannon was on our show 2 weeks ago, and intern Ben, he doesn't talk much when we let him, he does, but he asked a question and he said, hey, is this a contract year for you, Gannon? Because we were all wondering like what's going on with Gannon. And Gannon goes, yeah, it is for me. And he goes, do you feel any pressure? Like you're worth more or whatever? And he says, and it was interesting because now in hindsight, really knowing that like this is forefront of his brain, his answer is really pretty interesting. And he talks about just openly without saying anything like about the change up coming. He's like, yeah, money's second for me. I care about playing a lot. He goes, but I am getting paid a contract from before I was playing this well, blah, 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 blah. So like it was in his head. And he had talked through these things because he was even saying like, he said an interesting stat that I'm like, you might know that as a player, but it's also interesting because he talked about like the year before I was ranked this in the world. And then like this year I'm ranked this. Like it's almost as if he had to set his resume up because he's going shopping somewhere else or they were coming for him and he had to be able to give his resume. Right. And it was interesting to hear that. But yeah, I honestly think favorite pick is definitely Discmania. And the announcement hasn't been made yet to those listening to the podcast. So if it is, it is. If it isn't, we look bad with our takes. The funny take that is going around, and I even heard this on the Foundation platform, and I don't know if they got it from our show or not, but Franklin discs, because that is what Gannon talked about on our show for about 10 minutes was Franklin discs. And we were just like, it kind of struck us as funny. We're like, he's sponsored by Prodigy, but he's going on and on about how impressive Franklin discs are. So it is a little funny, but who knows? I think Discmania, that's my pick.
Yeah.
And do you have a different pick?
No, I think that's the obvious one. Not so much because of who's following him or anything like that. I feel like with Simon leaving, obviously there's a huge hole in Discmania's lineup, and that needs to be filled. And actually, something that Eagle said a while ago about there being
he said it on our show, and I don't know if he said it anywhere else. But he said in ace, we don't, because I said, what's going to happen to Discmania?
Got an ace up our sleeve. Yeah.
I was like, is this bad for Discmania? Like, what's going to happen to the company? And he's like, oh, you don't worry. We've got an ace up our sleeve. I texted him immediately after he got off our show and I said, what's this ace you're talking about? And he didn't respond. And he always, I don't want to say he always responds, but Eagle always responds. And like, so when he didn't respond, I'm like, all right, they're really trying to be tight-lipped after the Simon thing. Everyone's learning their lesson, which is an interesting topic. That's why I was asking you if you were surprised, because I really felt like for the most part, was it either that the news wasn't as big as Simon's or that they had learned a large lesson and everyone was keeping their mouths way tighter. It was one or the other. I think the announcement's going to be pretty big. I don't think it would. It's hard to compare to Simon's announcement, but I also think that people learn to keep their mouths tighter. I mean, I that's what I think. I don't even think people that were close to him probably knew.
Do you think he is I feel like he has to say who he's going to be with before this weekend then, right? Like I feel like what's he going to do? Show up and play with whammos?
It would be awesome if he showed up and did like the distance competition and he's like, here's my Gannon Buhr line. Someone made the Doom Buhr joke.
Doomber. Yeah.
Interesting.
Throws Franklin discs. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, break that down a little bit. First of all, if he hasn't announced and he hasn't signed a contract yet, which you may be surprised. I'll just say the inner workings of disc golf is not as tight as you might think it is. Meaning, I'll just leave it at this. Simon signing a contract was a lot later in the rumor period than anyone knew. That's what I'll leave it at that. I hope Simon doesn't listen to this show, but that's the truth. So like that kind of thing, when everyone's talking so confidently about stuff, it's interesting because you're kind of like, well, you're so sure. Like, I'll look at intern Ben and be like, I know for sure, but you're telling me you know so sure of something, and I all I can do is smile at you and like, no, you're wrong. So, and that again, that's few and far between that happens, but like that's interesting. And so, meaning like the Gannon Buhr thing, that's my point. There might not even be a contract signed yet. It's very possible. And if that's the case, he can throw whatever he wants. And maybe he comes out. This is a hot take. Maybe he comes out this weekend throwing everything just to throw everybody off.
Like a mixed bag?
Yeah, just to like throw everybody off. Like, I've got everything in here. Ha. Even Franklin. I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled out a bag of Franklin's starter practice.
I wouldn't.
Like
just to troll everybody. Yeah, just to troll everybody.
Night Owl is what I have in my garage that I found. It's a Franklin disc. That's the only one I know.
I feel like that's like right up his humor alley to do something like that too.
Yeah, he would play it up for sure. But other than that, if he's not ready to announce and the deal isn't fully together, then yeah, he'll either keep throwing Prodigy or he'll probably throw an open bag. That would be my guess. Otherwise, would he make the announcement in the next day or two? Like it's literally, I think it starts tomorrow or Friday.
Friday, I think.
Friday, yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I have a text from him that he texted me this afternoon. Like I said, I asked him for the interview, and we're friendly in the sense that as soon as he made the announcement, I reached out and said like, hey, the Nick and Matt show is stoked for you. Like, we'd love to line up the interview once you announce. And then I played a little funny. I don't know if coy is the right word, but I was like, hey, should we line you up for this next Monday? Like, when's the announcement? Without saying when's the announcement, it's like, should we line you up for this Monday? And no answer. And then I responded again the next day, hey, I know you're busy. Keep us in the loop. We want to snag this interview. Mm-hmm. And he responds, I'm down. And he still didn't give me information. He says, when it comes out, text me. So he's not, this is my point. It's really tight-lipped right now. That's what I'll say. So I don't know. When will it be announced? I don't know.
And when we had him on, he was very impressively well-spoken for a 17-year-old with the accolades he has. He was, and I mean, it's showing with this that he's able to keep everything under wraps. I mean, if I was 17 and getting some of the money that people are guessing that he's going to get, I would keep my mouth shut.
What numbers you hearing? I mean, I've heard everything from 250 a year to 500,000 being a high number. Will we know? That's a whole nother conversation because Discmania is not known for sharing their numbers.
No, they're not.
Ooh.
They're not. And what's interesting is like even Simon's announcement, what did he say? I think he said this, that I have never actually said any of those numbers or something like that. Like all of those numbers were all speculation and he actually wouldn't confirm anything. So
we thought that was really interesting. And that was something that came out of that interview that we felt like we wanted to put a little spotlight on. And what do you know? We put it out, and the next morning, Hunter Thomas and Trevor Staub made a whole segment about it on their show. It was really interesting because we do like a pre-show discussion with our guests, especially when it's like a big deal. Like, what can we talk about? I run all the questions by him that I think could be sensitive. And I made my own assumption. And I said, oh, so can we talk about XYZ numbers? And he goes, that's speculation. And I said, what do you mean? It's like Ultiworld, go read it. And obviously I'm talking to the man who would have said something. He goes, I never said those numbers. I never said any of that. Now, that's a whole nother topic. But if you go back right now and reread the Ultiworld article, you would have to know that Simon didn't say that stuff to read it that way. Because if you don't know and you read it, it looks and sounds to you as you're reading it as if they are saying this was a response to this information we just provided you. For instance, Ultiworld says this number, this long, yada, yada. And then it does quotations from Simon afterwards being like, yeah, this is an amazing deal. I'm happy for my future. But Simon's not talking about the numbers. He's just giving them quotes about how happy he is about the deal. So it's like somebody gave the numbers. So I'm not going to say the numbers are probably wrong. Like Ultiworld's not going to post them unless they're sure. At least that's how I feel. So I'm not knocking Ultiworld. I just wish for Simon's sake and for the betterment of everybody that they would have did some sort of disclaimer, like Simon wouldn't comment on, or you know what I mean? Something along that. And they could say, here's what we got from our source. You know what I mean? Like that's what I wanted. Do I benefit or lose from it? No, but I am close to Simon and I have some feelings for him, like that was never talked about. So yeah, there's still speculation up there on how much Simon's getting and how long and all that. Well, we know 10 years. So
yeah, that came out when we were recording our podcast talking about Simon announcing. Like we were in the middle of the recording, someone started blowing up our group chat like, dude, check this out. And yeah, I don't think either of us got the impression that was completely entirely speculation. It sounded like that was just the numbers.
Like that was what it was. Yeah, it was just really weird. Like it was for it to have been speculation, it was phrased so strangely, and like
everybody thought it. In fact, Disc Golf Pro Tour thought it. Social media post that day or the next day saying $1 million a year for 10 years. Like that's what the Disc Golf Pro Tour posted. And they're like, link to the article here. And it's like nobody even thought there was a chance that it was a question. Like I said, Foundation, everybody thought it. But when we did the interview, that stood out. And I'm like, I don't know how many people actually caught that, but he's saying, and that's why I pushed him, because we talked prior to the show. We knew that was going to come up. And that's why I pushed him. I said, so can you tell me that you're saying if there's information out there that it shouldn't be out there and you didn't talk about it? And he goes, yes. And so we clipped that, posted it. And then some people ran with it. Some people were like, Ultiworld, we wish you would do things differently. Or like no comment from Ultiworld on it. Nothing changed. I went back and looked to see if they wrote anything in there saying like, like revised or edit, but no, nothing. So they have a source. They probably have the information right. But yeah, that's interesting. That goes all the way back to Discmania. That goes back to Discmania. We're saying they keep their lips tight. So I don't know that we'll hear anything about Gannon.
Yeah, if he goes to Discmania.
If he goes to Discmania.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What's your thoughts on players disclosing the salaries? Evan and I have talked about this a few times, but what's your thoughts on that?
I'm laughing. Nick cares about this a lot more than I do. He's a little bit more. He's a little bit more in that pro scene. He dabbles. I'll call it dabbles. He knows it. Like he toured more last year. He's going to tour, I think, less this year. He dabbles, but he's in the loop with a lot of these players that are making these salaries. He thinks, and I don't think he's wrong, betterment for the sport in general, or the players, obviously, is for everybody to know.
Right.
Because if you know what somebody else is making and you're doing 10 times, 20 times as much as they are, that's your ticket. Like, hey,
it's your value.
I'm going to go somewhere else because I can get more. So the companies don't necessarily want players to know. So my take is it's an interesting thing. And until it becomes a players union where it's a requirement or something along those lines, I don't think it will ever happen mandatorily. Like Discmania, it's smart for themselves to keep it quiet. That being said, my last thought is Discraft. I don't think they rolled the dice, but when they picked up Paul Macbeth, that was obviously the right move. But then secondly, to announce it sounds like a big power play for both Discraft and Paul. They both benefited from that. And they continue to announce their larger deals. And I think it makes them be a power player like Discraft. Discmania, I don't want to say smaller company, but they really are.
They are a
smaller company than a lot of people realize. Having Simon and Eagle and then Kyle, and then of course a handful of others, like they had incredible talent. And it didn't benefit them to be like, we're already doing well and people have a good view of us. Like, we don't need to spend the money to make people think we're, big and powerful. So I don't know. It might happen. What did we see with DD? They last year, Ricky Wysocki and Kona, like they came out like million, like that was their big marketing thing. Like it was all
helicopter rides. Yeah.
It was emphasis on this big power play. And that's because over time, they didn't have the players. Prodigy's in the same boat right now. And that's the topic that we're going to try to pick up on our next episode is like, what is the problem with Prodigy? Is there a problem? But like, what is it? And is it literally they do not have the ability to pay? And if that's the case, that's unfortunate. But it doesn't look good. Innova was losing lots of players too. The downside of that is Innova has the money to pay. But they've decided they're the big dog in the room and they don't need these players. So everybody's in a different boat. If Discmania lost Eagle and they didn't get Gannon, now I think they're in a position where they would have to make some massive deal and it might benefit them to talk about the numbers, but I don't think they're there yet.
Yeah. As long as they have, go ahead.
I've heard that Prodigy really doesn't, kind of like what Innova's exterior look is now. Prodigy is like that as well, just it's not as like people rake them over the coals like they do Innova, but I've heard it's similar of just congratulations, your job is to move plastic and occasionally play well. But you don't get as much of a salary or stuff like that. I don't know how much I can particularly talk about it, but
as much as you want, man. But yeah, like everybody's salaries are different. When you hear, and I'm going to throw a number out there that I actually know nothing about, but when you hear Gannon Buhr is making $40,000 a year, again, that's a number I'm just making up. But when he realizes I'm making 40,000 and this guy over here who won a major and has done this and I'm just as good as him and I'm ranked number 4 in the world is making $200,000 a year, you're going, this just doesn't feel right. Like this just doesn't feel right. I like the company. I like the people, but I'm not going to give that big of a pay cut to help other people feel good. Like I don't know. So
yeah. I'll guess that it's going to be similar to a Chris Dickerson with Discraft type deal, but with Discmania. They'll probably never say it, but it's kind of the level. And Gannon's got decades ahead of him in disc golf. He could be a Paul Macbeth, Ricky Wysocki making millions a year, but at the time, for the time being, he's just going to make a crap load of money that's not millions of dollars.
How much time is going to be spent on a contract?
That's such a good right. So because you would think Discmania would want to lock him in as long as possible.
Low and long.
They would probably, 250 for 10 years. Come on, baby, sign the deal.
I know.
Let's go. But if Gannon's smart, which
this is what I'm asking.
I would do like a 2-year, and then renegotiate a year. I know. I would go short term,
but that also hurt him in negotiations later, because then companies are going to say, hey, if you sign this 2-3 year deal, like say it is Discmania. It does 2-3 years, and then he tries to skip town again as the next company gonna say, look, it doesn't matter how much you've won, you're skipping around everywhere. It's gonna hurt you.
And just to bring this full circle, because you both made excellent points, is it worth it to a company like Discmania to just do a 2-year deal where they're like, we're going to invest this money and this time, and then somebody leaves, right? So like, it'd be like, is it worth it for us to do a 2-year? Just throwing that number out there. And then you look at someone like Simon, who goes, that wouldn't be worth it for me. Like, we want to get it to this 10-year mark, because now the advantage also can go to the player. Because what happens, and I'm not saying this will, what happens when Gannon doesn't perform as well? If he locked in a great contract, then he's in the win. So 2 years might not be good for him if he doesn't play well. Like, he's like,
he doesn't perform.
So it could go both ways. But I will say, at the very least, they need to write in there some sort of clause to readdress at this time with an option. Options, buyouts, all of this stuff.
Refusal type stuff that, like,
write it all in there. Get it all in there, because again, speculation says that his contract with Prodigy it wasn't written up that well. That's what speculation would say right now, because
well, I mean, when Gannon first, how long was Gannon's contract? Was it a 2-year contract? I'm pretty sure
that's what his latest was. Yes.
Okay, so like 2 or 3 years ago, and this isn't any way sort of diss or anything like that, but how relevant was he as a player?
Not
so.
Very. Yes.
When that happened, Prodigy was kind of like, sure, hop on board, let's go, team. So I doubt this dude is getting paid like literally anything. You know what I mean? He's probably so.
Well, he was 14, 15 when he signed that contract.
Yeah, it's my point.
And that's where this topic came from. I'm saying, how important is the contract? Because again, let's do that. Let's do him justice. He's 15, and they offer him, I'm making up a number again, they're offering him $40,000 or $50,000 a year, and you're 15.
All day. Sign immediately.
Yeah, you're like, how long? 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and then he goes on.
Let's go, baby.
He goes on to win and perform extremely well last year, and is number 4 in the world based off of his more or less average finishes. That's insane.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So I feel like at 15, you're probably not smart enough. And I would hope that, he had involvement. I'm sure he did. I'm not going to downplay it. He had involvement from his parents and other insight and people that were smart with it. And I don't think Prodigy was trying to screw anybody. But when you sign a contract, I bet it was like, yes, I'll do this for 4 years. Like, and there was not much in there to say, here's a way to get out. Here's buyouts. Here's options. None of that. I'm sure it was just pretty basic. And now he's like, But that leads me to also say, what's the value of a contract at this point in disc golf's history? The fact that Paul left Innova, the fact that Ricky left Innova, the fact that Dickerson left Prodigy, that Gannon left Prodigy, and these were all on contracts. So,
yeah. Also with Gannon's contract that he just left,
Simon Lizotte.
Simon, yeah. What was the actual health of the contracts at that point in time? Was it more of a handshake, here you go, kid?
Okay,
or
Paige
like
Pierce. Pierce, that was another one. And there was a lot that came out on that, now that you bring it up.
Yeah,
it's kind of what it was.
Yeah, there's nothing really locking it down. It's just an understanding.
Well, that wraps up part 1 of our interview with Matt Grayum. You can find Matt's podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and all major platforms at The Nick and Matt Show. You can find Dan on Instagram at dhesser and me at Evan Amstutz DG. Remember to follow the pod on Instagram at Mediocre Disc Golf Pod and on Twitter at Mediocre DG Pod. If you'd like to support us, buy our shirts on mythicdiscgolf.com and listen to us every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you enjoyed the show, leave us 5 stars in a review, and if you didn't, still give us 5 stars and tell us why. We know we aren't perfect because we are mediocre.